In this last segment of radio and its promises, we will talk about radio regulation and then look at some of the social and political impact that radio has had. So let's start with regulation. The Radio Act of 1912 came about in response to the tragedy of the Titanic. It also came about because the U.S. Navy was concerned about amateur radio operators sort of taking over the airwaves. The Navy went to Congress and asked that there be a means by which operators of radio stations would have to have a license and then a frequency assigned to them. This went along for a while until the Radio Act of 1927, which established the Federal Radio Commission. The Federal Radio Commission put together some rules about how the airwaves should operate, but some basic premises as well. The airwaves belong to the people. Now, this is a premise that really isn't based in the Constitution. It really isn't based in anything but the philosophy of the individuals who developed it. Nonetheless, it has stayed with us today, and it is still the guiding principle for at least some points of view on how broadcasting should be regulated. So the Federal Radio Commission distributed licenses, but they also set up criteria by which radio operators had to function. This was reviewed again in the Federal Communication Act of 1934, which set up the Federal Communication Commission, which is still in operation today. It's still the major regulatory body for electronic media. In 1934, it was to regulate telephone, telegraph, and radio. The goal was for government to protect the business interests of the corporations that owned the radios, but also they applied what was called the public interest standard. That meant that if you have a license, you are using a public resource, that is the airwaves, and therefore you need to operate in PICAN, P-I-C-A-N, the public interest, convenience, and necessity. So as you go on in your media education, you will see that there's still debate about whether radio should be regulated according to PICAN or whether there should be a market model. That is, should the companies that own most of the radio stations be allowed to do what's in their own business interests, assuming that then the public interest will be met. Radio, of course, is in transition. You know from when we talked about the transition after World War II and radio became popular with young people. Radios began to be in cars. People just got used to having radio around. In fact, at one point, the average household had 5.5 radios. 94% of all people older than 12 hear radio within a week. Spanish language radio has become extremely popular and a way of incorporating dual language culture. Talk radio has changed radio's role in today. Now, one thing we haven't talked about, but we will when we get to television, is the fact that radio had to completely redefine itself when television as a new medium came along. And so we'll see that again today with the internet and the change in how our political structures work, radio has come to take a very important role. So what is the social and political impact of radio? Well, it clearly, from early on, became a form of entertainment. It became a form of capitalism, support for a business model, which has a lot of implications for what we expect from radio and later television. It became a very important vehicle for news, and so we talked about FDR and the role of the radio in World War II. Television overtook a lot of that, and again, radio had to redefine itself, but it was truly a powerful and influential political tool from the early to the mid-20th century. And as the last point says, in the early years of radio, it truly helped unify a nation. Very diverse people, different incomes, different classes, different races, different nationalities, different educational levels. The huge diversity of the United States found a common voice and a common set of perspectives that came through the radio. Your author also talks about the influence of radio on political discourse today. Talk shows have become extremely important. So people like Rush Limbaugh, Ann Coulter, particularly conservative voices have found a place in radio. What they've found, what research has shown, is that people who are active in radio talk shows are typically more informed, better informed about politics, and are better engaged with civics. This is not so much true, though, for the really extreme conservative talk show hosts. These people tend to, and this includes, Fox News today and television, people who watch those or listen to Rush Limbaugh and others actually tend to be quite misinformed. But that's the beauty of the model that we have. People have the opportunity to hear all kinds of different voices on radio. Next week, we will move on to our discussion of television, the truly revolutionary medium of the 20th century.